what you said about the larger argument that is running through the books about the Norn society.
Well, yeah, okay. There's actually three different things that were going on at that point where we stopped, and the thing about the Norn society, what I was actually talking about in the original frame, because I think the same way I write. The original frame for this, the box that was in, was what I am finding interesting about thinking about short novels and novella length work. And that is very similar to what I was interested in when I was first thinking about doing what we were going to call a Chronicle in Stone, which were the short story collection of Osten Ard material. But this is, even though these are not the stories that I'm talking about maybe writing now that were going to be in the original one, because most of those are being subsumed into the Witchwood Crown books. The stories I want to write in some of the shorter pieces, the shorter novels and novellas, are really interesting to me because at a shorter length I can find another way into the material, a sideways angle, an odd place to focus on, a number of things that wouldn't work in the larger narrative or would have to be a larger narrative if I did them in the normal Osten Ard approach. So even though the first novella is slightly, and this is where we get back to what you were asking.
Except for it isn't a novella anymore.
Right, okay. The first short novel, Heart of Regret, is, in many ways, it's actually very similar to the kind of Osten Ard style, I'll say, for lack of a better term. But the one difference with that is it's the first time, since it's going to come out before the Witchwood Crown, it'll be the first time that the readers will have had an actual viewpoint from the Norns. That's a big part of the story, is one of the Norn characters and his viewpoint. And
it's the war from both sides.
Right, but it's also, I'm just saying, each time I do these things, I like to try to find a new way in, and the new way in this one is it's my first introduction of that, and that viewpoint. But it's also important because, and here's your original question, all through the Last King of Osten Ard series, the upcoming series, the idea, there's a whole politico-philosophical set of ideas that are going to run all through the books and will feature heavily with the ending. I can say that without giving anything away because it sounds absolutely meaningless if you don't know what I'm talking about. So that's that's why it's different. Is that it's got that POV, and that POV is also important to the readers too, because they're going to get used to seeing things not just from the human side, but from their dire enemy's side as well. But I always, all the Osten Ard stuff.
It's the pity of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But
that's how it affects me. It's the pity of things.
Well, yeah, it's not even pity. I'm always been firmly convinced that everybody thinks they're the good guys. Everybody is fighting for their own personal narrative, whatever it might be, and with very few exceptions.
Well, they are. They are.
Yeah. So we're just getting to hear.
Everybody is the good guys. That's all we know.
Well, they think they are. I think we still have to develop some subjective rules about actions and say, well, that's not acceptable. Killing millions of people or whatever, no.
That's right, because we are seeing a lot of Norn society from very high levels, but for the vast majority of what lives inside the mountain,
and that will become,
it's pretty miserable.
And that's one of the themes that will be developed during the books. There's a whole, the Norns are a very important part of the next set of books. But anyway, so I'm thinking about finding different ways into these, and for instance, talking about the possible next short novel. What I see in my mind's eye already is that what will be particularly interesting about this one will be the viewpoint characters' very kind of classical, historical take on things. because this guy is, somebody who's, by his standards, is, one of the most incredible world travelers of his age, because he will have seen and met so many different kinds of people.
Who's this?
This is in the novella, or the short novel that I'm thinking about writing next after Heart of Regret, which has no name yet. It was the one I was just describing to you earlier, where this guy is sent as a legate of the newly enthroned Nibanai imperator.
This is how long ago?
About 1,500 years before the action of the Dragonbone chair and everything else. So yeah, sort of their equivalent of about 400 BC, I guess. But anyway, and then the idea in my mind, though, is that not only does this guy eventually wind up in the Scythi-Norn shared city of Enki-Ashausaye, but he is there at the time, quite possibly, of the parting itself, when the two clans split apart forever and went their separate ways.
Being the two clans being...
The Scythi and the Norns. And the Scythi and Norn split up. It's something Simon had a vision of in the first Two Green Angel Tower book, I think, near the beginning. He had a vision, and he saw, for a variety of reasons that were explained, he saw a vision of what had happened in that place where he was, the Siswadra, the Stone of Farewell, and he had a vision of seeing the Scythi and the Norns parting ways. And so I was thinking it might be really interesting to see that, but not from the point of view of the Scythi and the Norns, and not from the point of view of, Simon seeing it in a dream, where it was just very, kind of expressionistic, but of an actual person of the time, an educated, comparatively, very intellectually questioning kind of a guy of his era, who winds up among the Scythi and the Norns, these largely mythical beings. It's just like, was it Herodotus who came back from and reported about, people in Africa with their heads in their chests and stuff?
That's right.
So he's kind of he's the equivalent of this, but the thing about Herodotus...
There are large chunks of fantasy in Herodotus.
Well, but the thing about Herodotus, if I remember correctly, that is really wonderful, is that he always clearly states his own... He separates his own experience from what he has been told.
Yeah.
So he doesn't
Yeah.
he doesn't tend to share stories as though these are true things that he can testify to. But when he does describe things himself, he has proven extremely... I mean, he's the basis for a lot of historical and archaeological ideas. But so anyway, so I thought the idea of a character, not quite Herodotus, I mean, not quite that advanced, but an intelligent guy, sort of like the Da Vinci or Michelangelo, maybe of his era also, or somebody like that, or Archimedes, with a kind of weird quasi-governmental connection. But anyway, winds up among the Scythi and the Norns as they're coming to the end of their time as one race.
Archimedes.
Yeah, didn't I say that?
Yes, you did. Yeah, no, I'm just catching on it. That's that really interests
I mean,
me.
so an intelligent guy with a sense of humor of his era, which is, sort of
I know
Archimedes
Europe. Was a genius.
It's Iron Age Europe. Well, that's what I was saying, maybe more like Marco Polo is what I was saying before. Like Marco Polo, who, whatever else he was no, inventive genius, but he was a very smart guy, and he paid very good attention, and he, albeit with some stretching of the truth here and there, basically told a very accurate and pretty compelling story of his trip through a part of the world that was as crazy as this would be in the story I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the idea of that kind of character, sort of overwhelmed but bemused also by how, these kind of almost mythical beings are quite real and quite, flesh and blood, and they have, I mean, their whole culture is totally different, of course, but as he gets to know them, he also sees, these are actual beings that bleed and die, and so even as they lose some of their magical glamour, but at the same time you get to see the yawning kind of gulf between their society and ours, and their conceptions and ours, and I don't know, I just think it could be really fun and interesting in a lot of ways. So that's kind of feeling like that might be the next thing. I'm kind of tentatively, I'll call it the Veils of Heaven right now, because that just seems like something I could work into it. But yeah, so you get a little bit of early Imperial in the band, and you get a little bit of travelogue of some of the rest of Osten Ard before most of the present-day countries had their names and stuff like that. And then you get a big bunch of Scythian Norns and their final contentious and heartbreaking separation. So yeah, I think that could be kind of cool.